Post-World War II, the aircraft carrier has shrugged off its competitors for the #1 position in the fleet. The years of nuclear brinkmanship almost saw the relegation in favour of fast submarines. But the Grey Ladies have shown their adaptability and potency time and again to become what they are today, the essence of sea power. In today's domination of the oceans, it is not argued that the nuclear aircraft carrier is the reigning monarch. Though for a time, the ascendancy of guided missiles and fast submarines raised debates as to whether the Grand Ladies would be replaced, just as they had supplanted the great battleships during the Second World War. However, the turn away from specific nuclear conflicts and the concept of limited conventional war has made the role of the modern aircraft carrier and their associated carrier attack group one of the most adaptable and decisive of military forces. While some of the roles they perform have varied, the force they convey gives the Navy control of the sea lanes, as well as a region as far inland as necessary to establish safe zones and areas of control. The aircraft carrier groups operating from international waters provide a presence, which can be increased or withdrawn as the situation dictates. Should the situation escalate, the carrier and air wing are ready on arrival to accomplish whatever mission is given, from unobtrusive surveillance to strikes and anything in between. Although aircraft carriers are routinely deployed near traditional areas of potential conflict, their ability to move to another area of the world should a crisis erupt and be ready to operate upon arrival has made them the big guns in the roles in which they are employed today. The development of these new supercarriers is a product of the 50 years of turmoil following their baptizing in the Second World War. These periods of global conflicts have seen the carriers grow significantly in scale and scope to meet the many and varied threats confronting them. In 1928, the US operated 3 carriers. These 3 ships allowed development of concepts and trials in the new theories of naval air warfare. The 3 ships were trialled as task groups in many and varied hypothetical situations. It soon became obvious that the larger carriers, Saratoga and Lexington, would be significantly more capable than originally thought. In a series of fleet problems, the carriers demonstrated their effectiveness when they proved their enthusiast theories conclusively. In 1932 and 38, war games were again conducted in regard to Pearl Harbor, and again a profound result in favour of the carriers. These games proved their worth in the coming years, with the commanders gaining valuable practice, and the crews and pilots honing the skills that they would be needing in the very near future. Technologies rapidly advanced. The greater lift from 2 wings of the original biplanes allowed short takeoff and the safest possible returns to the flight decks with slower landing speeds. However, the advances in aeronautics soon made the biplane's graces a liability. The US Navy's first intentionally designed carrier was Ranger, launched in 1939. She proved to have shortcomings, primarily due to lack of size and speed. The older Saratoga and Lexington had been built on battle cruiser hulls and were significantly larger. The Yorktown-class aircraft carriers were built not long before World War II. The first 2 ships, Yorktown and Enterprise, were commissioned in 1937 and 1938. The lessons learned from operations with the larger battlecruiser conversion Lexington class versus the smaller Ranger taught the Navy that large carriers, rather than small ones, were more operationally flexible and survivable. Thanks to these lessons, the Navy built the new carriers to the largest tonnage that the treaties of the time allowed, 25,000 tons. The resulting ships were large, flexible and powerful, giving the US Navy fire carriers totaling 134,000 tons, which, with the addition of the 20,000-ton Wasp, another small carrier, brought the US Navy up to the full treaty tonnage limit. The scrapping of the treaty system in 1937 allowed the US to begin building more carriers. The first of this new carrier program was another Yorktown class. Hornet, commissioned in 1941. Improvements of lessons learned in Yorktown design brought about the Essex class. During the same period, the fleet problem exercises again showed up the significant weaknesses in the defense of Pearl Harbor to air attack from carrier-based planes. On December 7, 1941, the Japanese combined fleet would settle all arguments regarding air power at sea by exploiting Pearl's weaknesses. Here, the 6 Imperial carriers would remove a very significant percentage of the American fleet, almost solely with the use of their air power. Immediately after the losses at Pearl, it fell to the remaining carriers to hold the line until the new Essexes would be able to make up the numbers. These existing carriers proved their worth in many battles, including the Coral Sea, Midway and Leyte Gulf. The first of the Essex class would not be commissioned until December of 1942. The USS Essex itself was over 60 feet longer, nearly 10 feet wider, and more than a third heavier than the Yorktown. As a mark of their worth, none of the Essex-class carriers were lost, and 2 of them, Franklin and Bunker Hill, came home under their own power even after being grievously damaged. The Franklin itself, as sea battles drew closer to the Japanese homeland, suffered tremendous damage when 2 armor-piercing bombs pierced the flight deck and ignited fuel stores and ammunition. The ship was racked by huge explosions. Only the efforts of the crew eventually saved the ship, and she made it back to Pearl Harbor and then New York under her own power. The next class of carrier built was the Midway series, first commissioned in late 1945. The lead ship of the class, USS Midway, was not decommissioned until 1991, shortly after seeing service in the Gulf War. These were some of the longest-lived carrier designs in modern history. The class was originally conceived as the largest aircraft carrier of the era. At 45,000 tons, almost twice the size of the Essex class at 27,000 tons, their size grew from strengthened armour and bigger engines, but also to provide the ability to carry more planes than any other carrier in the US fleet, 30 to 40 more than the Essex class. In their original configuration of World War II aircraft, they had an air wing of almost 130 aircraft. It turned out, though, that these numbers were well beyond the controllability of a single ship. However, perhaps fortuitously, jet technologies were dawning, and the greater carrying ability of the class made it perfect for the larger and heavier jet fighter planes that started showing up in the late 1940s and 1950s. The jets of the era were replacing the pinnacle of the piston-engine Navy planes, Douglas Helldivers, F-4U Corsairs, or F-6F Hellcats. Grumman's F-7F Tigercat was one of the many new suitors to lose against the rapidly evolving jet field. Designed to fill all carrier roles, this twin-propeller fighter could also carry bombs or a torpedo. It was McDonnell's FH-1 Phantom that first took to the air in 1945 and from a carrier in 1946 as the US Navy's first true jet fighter. The advances being made in jet experiences saw many different designs ordered, though only in small numbers, as the models were rapidly outdated by the rapid leaps in technology. Over 20 different fighter types were trialled in the 10 years after the FH-1 was introduced. The larger, heavier and faster planes caused major changes as a matter of course in the decks and design of the carriers. The early 1950s saw three major changes: the angle deck, the return of catapults, and the change to electronic landing controls. The angled deck was a huge advance as the increased momentum of jets was causing significantly higher landing accidents. The existing crash barriers could not contain the heavier planes, and the resultant spilling jet fuel and armaments was a recipe for disaster. The angled deck let a pilot who missed catching an arrestor wire open throttle and gain altitude for a second attempt. The Midway class and 14 of the Essex class were progressively fitted with new angled decks, along with greater fire control and fuel storage for the thirsty new jets. Another advancement was the installation of steam catapults. These became essential as the planes became heavier and larger. Today, they can fire a throttling jet forward at 170 miles an hour in 300 feet. The batsman, as seen on earlier carriers, would leap about the deck, directly warning the incoming pilot of vagrancies in his approach. The speed of the jets forestalled any real ability of biplane between the batsman and pilot. By the time the batsman had his meaning across, the issue he was translating may have become a terminal problem. The meatball lights directly aided the pilot in lining up for the landing. If the lights line up with the appropriate marker light in the mirror, then the pilot knows he's on course. As the angle at which the pilot looks at the lights changes, he can see directly the adjustment he needs to make. Too high, too low, and if the pilot is very low, a wave off. There are variations built in to adapt to each style of plane and differing weather condition. In theory, the pilot flies the plane down a narrow, safe corridor straight onto the carrier deck. It is estimated that the angled deck and automated landings have halved the accidents on US carriers. 1952 saw construction beginning of a new class of ship. The Forrestal class was the first class of supercarriers of the Navy, so called because of their extraordinarily high tonnage, 75,000 tons, fully integrated angled deck, very large island, and extremely strong air wing. Compared to the Midway class, the Forrestals were 100 feet longer and nearly 30 feet beamier, resulting in a far more stable and comfortable aircraft platform, even in very rough weather. Forrestal class ships were the first examples of supercarriers, but also the first which were to have nuclear weapons as an option for their aircraft. With the Korean conflict looming, the class went into production. The replacement of centerline elevators with port and starboard side lifts freed up huge areas of deck space. With 4 instead of 2 catapults, the Forrestal's could launch up to 8 planes a minute. These were the first truly jet-oriented carriers. Launched in 1954 and commissioned 10 months later, USS Forrestal was the first of 6 in the class over the next 10 years. By this time, the introduction of nuclear intercontinental missiles made the necessity of dropping nuclear bombs from planes outdated. While their ability and fast deployment of forces maintained a solid demand for the carriers, their costs were now beginning to gain notice of politicians. The 8th USS Enterprise was the world's first nuclear supercarrier. She remains the longest aircraft carrier in the world today, though in tonnage she is surpassed by the Nimitz class. When launched, the Enterprise was the most powerful weapon ever constructed. She was also the most expensive, $451.3 million. The previous Forrestal was $188 million. Enterprise's propulsion is provided by 6 of her 8 reactors at any time, as 6 reactors generate the maximum steam the turbines can handle. Her keel was laid in 1958, and she was launched on 24 September 1960. Enterprise was intended to be the first of a class of 6 nuclear-powered aircraft carriers. However, costs ballooned during her construction, and remaining vessels were never laid down. The following Kitty Hawk class aircraft carriers were all conventionally powered ships. Series production of nuclear carriers would finally commence with the keel laying of USS Nimitz. The first of the Nimitz class of supercarriers, the lead ships of the class, was commissioned in 1975 with a bill of $1,181 million. As of 2004, George H.W. Bush, the 10th of the last of the class, is being built by Northrop Grumman Newport News and will enter service in 2008. Bush will be the first transition ship to a new class of carriers, to start construction in 2007. By tonnage, the Nimitz class composed by far the largest class of carriers ever built. When Bush is completed, the 10 ships of the class will total just under 1 million tons combined displacement. USS Nimitz was the first to undergo its initial refueling during a 33-month refueling complex overhaul in 1998. Aircraft carriers have undergone innumerable changes. Amazingly though, these powerful ships have only existed for less than a century. Yet they have undergone a metamorphosis of unbelievable proportions. The USS Langley, the US's first carrier, was only 10,000 tons displacement. The Nimitz class is nearly 100,000 tons. The changes have included such items as size, displacement and accommodation, to flight deck layout, habitability and propulsion. Oddly, most of these changes have actually occurred during the last 40 years. The US carrier fleet has components that are relatively new and some that are beginning to age. The USS Enterprise, commissioned in 1960, is now over 40 years old. While still a potent weapon, Enterprise will have to be retired within a few more years. Nimitz, the lead ship of the current class, is now nearly 25 years old. The next class of aircraft carrier is already on the drawing boards. The Navy was originally going to build a totally new class of ship called the CVX, but with rising developmental costs, an evolved Nimitz class is to carry on for the future. The new class will be slightly larger than the current ships, carry approximately the same number of aircraft, about 80, but require less manpower than the current ships. This will be accomplished through increased automation of many tasks. The Navy has long had the ability to automate many tasks, but has been reticent to do so due to the ability of people to reason in an emergency situation. Stealth will be increased by reducing the number of antennae and other protrusions and rounding off anything that can be. This should reduce the ship's radar signature considerably. Other measures will follow for cooling of topside structures to minimize the thermal signature as well. Concepts are for a ship of 100,000 plus tons, with a flight deck of approximately 1,040 feet in length. The crew would number somewhere between 3,000 to 4,000. The next generation of carrier, hull number CVN-78, is programmed to start construction in 2007 and is slated to be placed in commission in 2014 to replace USS Enterprise, which will be over its 50-year mark. CVN-79 is programmed to begin construction in 2012 and to be placed in commission in 2018. Whatever the design vagaries of the new carrier class, the place of the aircraft carrier seems certain for at least the foreseeable future. These grand ships with continual improvement have stood the test of time, and their current dominance in the world of sea power seems assured.